Hello, my name is Roger Oser. I currently serve as the principal of William J. Ostagai High School, which is a recovery high school located in Boston. I've served as the principal of Ostagai High since its inception in November of 2006. I'm excited to be here today in my role as a board member of the Association of Recovery Schools to present a series of video workshops with a focus on supporting individuals and organizations exploring the possibility of developing and operating a recovery high school. You can see on the slide our session objectives: to gain a shared understanding of the history and components of the Recovery High School model, to review the guidelines and deliverables in setting up a successful RHS prior to opening, and to identify and explore the 4 domains that provide the framework for a recovery school. Before we talk about the Recovery High School model and the different aspects of starting a Recovery High School, I certainly want to make sure people are familiar with the Association of Recovery Schools itself. ARS was founded in 2002 with the mission of supporting and inspiring recovery high schools for optimum performance, empowering hope and access to every student in recovery. Since its inception, ARS has spearheaded efforts to increase the prevalence and quality of RHSs across the nation. In addition to our annual conference, ARS accomplishments include the development of accreditation standards for recovery schools, completion of a market study in 2013 funded by the Stacey Mathewson Foundation, and the launch of a national data collection effort, the Systematic Evaluation of the Association of Recovery Schools, also known as SEERS. Additionally, ARS provides training and technical assistance such as this to both current and emerging recovery schools, as well as state and local entities interested in bringing a recovery high school to their area. Ostagai High itself, as well as the 4 other recovery high schools in Massachusetts, came into existence in large part due to the support of and guidance of the ARS community, and I will share a little bit more about the Ostagai origin story in connection to ARS later in the presentation. I would also like to take a moment to acknowledge the work of some specific ARS board members: Dr. Andy Finch, Morgan Thompson, Rebecca Bonner, and Sharon Dursey Martin, whose work provides the foundation for much of the information I'll be sharing with you today. Also, a note of appreciation and recognition of the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence, who through funding from SAMHSA has supported ARS to increase our capacity to provide technical assistance in a variety of ways, including through this video series. Thank you very much for your support. As we enter our discussion of the Recovery High School model and examine the various aspects of what it takes to start a Recovery High School, I think it's important as a starting point to emphasize and highlight the importance of language, specifically as it relates to our discussion of adolescents and recovery high schools. Quite simply, language matters. The words we use have the potential to cause a significant negative impact in a number of ways, including access to treatment and recovery outcomes, and creation and maintenance of negative stigma. Conversely, adopting and utilizing language that promotes deeper understanding, inclusion, as well as embracing complexity and nuance can help promote healthy, positive spaces and discussions related to adolescence and substance misuse. On this slide, we highlight some key words and concepts you will hear during this video series, and I wanted to take a moment to highlight how ARS understands and uses these terms. Recovery, a process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live a self-directed life, and strive to reach their full potential. If this looks familiar, sounds familiar, it's the SAMHSA definition of recovery, which was developed based on feedback from people across the country. This is the basis, the foundation of what we use in our schools, and in a few slides you'll see we do delve a little bit deeper and to have more clarity and a little bit more complexity to what recovery means to us in recovery schools, but this is a nice foundation. Recovery capital, the personal, social, and environmental resources required to sustain recovery. Recovery capital was initially an adult construct. There's a group of people, Jordan Jurinsky, Emily Hennessy, Dr. Finch, Sharon Dursey Martin in Oregon, who've really been working hard over the past 4 or 5 years to look at recovery capital and adopt it for the adolescent context. We think this is important because the traditional framing sometimes for recovery in adult, but also in the adolescent community, is harm reduction versus abstinence-based. Recovery capital allows us to look at a more of a strength-based asset and give us a different tool in our data and evaluation toolbox to tell the story of how our schools help support young people in recovery. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. In 2021, the Association of Recovery Schools joined the Association of Alternative Peer Groups, Faces and Voices of Recovery, and Young People in Recovery to acknowledge that racism is deeply rooted in structures, systems, organizations, communities, and individuals, and to unequivocally condemn all forms of racism and to commit to effecting change. We developed the North Star document, also referred to as the North Star Guide for Recovery leaders, that would help to address anti-Black racism in recovery, to hold ourselves accountable, and to help us continue this work collectively and individually to dismantle systemic racism and white supremacy within recovery agencies, program policies, systems, and settings. The last three sets of terms you see are terms, and you see the term in bold. That's the understanding and how we in the Association of Recovery Schools like to phrase the term. So, for example, we're more likely and comfortable using recurrence of use versus relapse. We're more likely to adopt substance misuse as a term versus substance use disorder, and abstinence focus versus abstinence based. And this is all driven by our desire to have a more inclusive, less judgmental framing for our work with adolescents. It's not saying that one term is right and one term is wrong. It's about creating an environment, once again, that promotes healthy two-way conversation about the strategies and the techniques and the components that we need to support our young people in their recovery journey. As indicated in this slide, there are currently 44 recovery high schools across the country. Recovery high schools emerged experimentally between 1987 and 1998 and sought to provide sober schooling without established blueprints. Among the early examples were schools in Maryland and Minnesota. These schools were founded by a diverse group of individuals in recovery, treatment professionals, parents, volunteers who recognized the need for school-based continuing care services for students in recovery. Their efforts laid the groundwork for the growth of recovery schools, with 25 opening between 1999 and 2005. This growth was influenced by factors such as school choice policies and the recovery community movement. In recent years, recovery high schools have gained increasing recognition as an evidence-informed model of continuing care for adolescents with substance use challenges. RHSs are featured in the Office of National Drug Control Policies, their 2022 National Drug Control Strategy, and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services 2016 Surgeon General's Report on Facing Addiction in America. Here's a map of where recovery high schools are located. You can actually locate this map on the ARS website, which I will show you as part of this presentation. And you can see there's clusters of schools across the country. The cluster I'm part of in Massachusetts, there's an expanding group of schools in Florida, the cluster in Minnesota, in Texas. But you can also see there are significant gaps. And that's one of the goals of ARS, is to make sure that an individual who lives anywhere in the United States can have access to a recovery high school. This slide indicates and kind of shows how the different funding models for recovery high schools. I think it's important to note that over 75% of our schools are publicly funded. Like the 5 schools in Massachusetts, including Ostagai, were all part of our local school district, our alternative education programs in our school district. About a quarter of our schools are public charter schools. A good example of a public charter school would be Hope Academy in Indianapolis. And a little under a quarter of the schools are private, but many of these private schools are hybrid models, and almost all of them provide some sort of tuition support for students to ensure equity of access. So we know a little bit now about recovery high schools. We know a little bit about the history, where they're located, how they're funded. But what is a recovery high school itself? The simplest definition, which is there on the screen, is secondary schools designed specifically for students in recovery from substance use disorder or dependency. Our goal is to educate students in recovery from substance misuse or co-occurring disorders. We are educational institutions. We must be able to meet state requirements for awarding a secondary school diploma. All students are working on an abstinence-focused program of recovery as agreed upon by that school and student. All students enrolled must be in recovery and working a program of recovery as determined by the student and the schools. And very importantly, they must be available to any student in recovery for substance misuse or co-occurring disorders who meet state or local district eligibility requirements for attendance. Let's take a little bit of a deeper dive to talk about a recovery high school and what we are. This language has been developed over years by many members of the ARS community. Most recently, this work has been picked up by Sharon Dorsey Martin in Oregon. And I think you can see this narrative piece right here. You can see the connection to some of the language we discussed earlier, the abstinence focused, substance misuse, and very importantly, the fact that students need to be at the center of this process. The importance of youth choice, power, and voice is key and central to the Recovery High School model. You take that narrative and let's break it down into some key concepts. Recovery high schools are non-coercive and non-judgmental. We're going to meet youth where they're at. Students who come to Recovery High School choose, they volunteer to come to our schools. They don't come to our schools just because they are mandated by the courts or forced by a family member or a school. They must have some sort of agency and choice in the process. Adolescents' needs are different than those of adults. I think anyone who's worked with adolescents knows this, and we've had this discussion a little bit already in the framing of the recovery capital concept and how we're trying to frame recovery capital for adolescents, which is different than the adult construct that it was initially developed for. Recovery high schools are most effective with youth who are moving out of the initial stages of change and into action. We cast as wide a net as possible to help young people impacted by substance misuse who are willing to make change. However, our experiences do show that students who are in action or in the maintenance stage specifically are the ones who benefit most from our model. Recovery schools aren't needed for everyone. Youth who are experimenting with substances or are using drugs successfully, which I know sounds weird to say. Maybe the flip side of using drugs successfully is that they're not being impacted negatively by substances. They're not in a place where they would benefit or should seek out a recovery high school. RHSs support multiple pathways of recovery, including abstinence-focused approaches that promote equity of access and student safety in the school environment. The importance of student safety cannot be overemphasized. It's at the root of everything we do. And then once again, RHS values student leadership, ownership, and voice in the development of programming. Recovery high school students are at the center of the process. Let's look at it from the flip side. We said this is what recovery high schools are, but what are recovery high schools not? Recovery high schools are not treatment programs. We're not designed to provide primary treatment for substance use or co-occurring disorders, and RHSs do not supplant or replace substance use or mental health treatment. Recovery high schools are meant to be part of a continuum of public health, schools, and community. We're not supposed to be providing all the services that a young person would need to move through the stages of change, starting with prevention and early intervention, leading to taking action and maintenance. We're part of a continuum, and that's where we work best. And then finally, participation in any form of treatment for substance misuse may not be an RHS entrance requirement, especially in areas where adolescents face a scarcity of treatment options or inequitable access to care. When we look at that last statement in the context of the stages of change, it's not magic. A student doesn't go from being pre-contemplative about their use to going to maintenance. There has to be a series of interventions, actions taken, and as I just mentioned, this can't be done by one entity. In some cases, I think in some places, people look at recovery high schools as the provider of all these services and providers of these services all parts of the stages of the change. And that's just not how the system works most effectively. However, it is important to note in areas, and this is the case in Massachusetts now, where publicly funded health, addiction health services has contracted, recovery high schools have tried to pick up the mantle. We have sought additional funding to provide services for students who are earlier in the stages of change. How we incorporate this work varies from school to school. It doesn't mean that kids who are contemplative or preparing to take action are put in the school with students who are in action or maintenance stage. It might be separate programs connected to the school, programs outside of the school. How this works varies, but the important thing to note is we understand that the model works best for kids in action and maintenance, but we also understand that we have a greater responsibility in our communities to cast a broad as net as possible and to be a vibrant, active member of that continuum that I have referenced. This is a good time to pause for a moment. We just reviewed what a recovery high school is, but maybe the most foundational piece of this process of starting a recovery high school is establishing the why. The how and what of recovery high schools are important, but it's all based on the foundation of the why. In Massachusetts, and I'll talk about the Ostagai story briefly. In Massachusetts, in the late 90s and early 2000s, there was a significant opioid epidemic leading to numerous overdoses and deaths among our adolescent population. Willie Ostagai, the namesake for Ostagai High, was the head of the Firemen's Assistance Program at that time, and he was hearing stories from his firefighter colleagues about their children who were being impacted negatively by this crisis. Those fortunate enough to access treatment would oftentimes get sober, but upon returning to their schools, old people, places, and things, they would experience recurrence of use at extremely high rates. Willie heard from one of his colleagues, firefighter colleagues in Minnesota, about the Association of Recovery Schools. And he, along with some local politicians and members of the public health community and community in general, attended the 2006 conference in Texas Tech. They were blown away. They were blown away by the level of support they received from the ARS community, how they were welcomed with open arms. At the conference, they learned a lot about the model, but more importantly, they came back to Massachusetts inspired by the people they had met at the conference from across the country who were already running recovery high schools and talking about the difference it was making for their young people. Upon their return, State Senator Stephen Tolman, who was on that trip, I think Willie dragged him there, sponsored the legislation that led to the creation of recovery high schools in Massachusetts. So all 44 recovery high schools have their own unique origin story, but at the foundation of all these stories are people, such as Willie Ostagai, with passion and commitment to make a difference for adolescents suffering from substance misuse. So now you as an individual and or your group of collaborating partners trying to start a recovery high school have established your why. Your enthusiasm and your excitement is catching the attention of some people in your community. At that point, you want to make sure that you are armed with the objective proof that shows in a data-driven way the impact of recovery high schools. The good news on that front is that it exists. There's people such as Dr. Andy Finch and others who have been developing a body of research about the efficacy of recovery high schools. It's still developing, but there's definitely enough information to help you attract additional allies to your cause. Let's take a quick look. Here's the headlines. Compared to students in non-recovery high schools who have received substance use treatment, students in recovery high schools have higher graduation rates, report significantly lower absenteeism, more likely to abstain from using substances, and have significantly fewer days using marijuana and other drugs. A little deeper dive into the substance use findings, showing how students in recovery high school environments coming out of treatment versus their peers that go back to their old school environments have higher rates of abstinence, lower rates of marijuana use, and just in general, there's significantly greater decline in alcohol use, marijuana use, any drug use. So we got our public health people because this is the information they want to hear. How about our school people? Well, here we go. Attendance and completion. That's what we want to know in schools. Are students showing up, and are they graduating grade level advancement? Are they completing? So students who attend recovery high schools reported significantly less overall absenteeism, and students who attended recovery high schools had significantly lower odds of dropping out. So that's music to school people's ears. So we have the public health people, we have the school people. Remember, the recovery high school is at the intersection of school, public health, and community. And now we can also make the story to the financial people, the number crunchers, the people who have to make the money work, the budget work, the cost benefit. So the cost benefit analysis has indicated that the high school graduation rate for recovery high school students is at least 20 percentage point higher than the graduation rate for similar students who have had SUD treatment but did not participate in recovery high school for at least 30 days. Higher graduation rates are a benefit to society. Conversely, lower dropout rates also are a benefit to society. And there's been some initial work to put a number value on that cost. And you can see it in this slide, and that work is continuing. So we have a public health benefit, we have a school benefit, and it's also cost efficient. So So you've heard me reference, I use the term RHS framework. So let's get a better, a greater understanding of what that means. Here on your screen are the four core elements, domains of Recovery High Schools as outlined in the ARS accreditation framework. It's recommended that a Recovery High School become accredited several years into their operation. To be eligible for accreditation, a school must have been in existence for at least 3 years. However, ARS recommends that RHSs gain a deep understanding of the framework even prior to beginning the planning stages for a new Recovery High School. By allowing the accreditation framework to guide the development and implementation of a new school, emerging Recovery High Schools can adhere to model fidelity from the outset. I can certainly share my story. I was not on the trip to Texas Tech in April, whenever it was, May, June, July, but I was there when the school opened in November. And what happened and how we were able to open was the initial book that Dr. Andy Finch wrote that evolved into the accreditation frameworks was waiting for me on my desk on my first day at Recovery High School, at Ostagai High. And this book, which once again was the foundation for the accreditation frameworks, became kind of my Bible. It had all the information that I needed, a little bit overwhelming at first, but then once again, ARS to the rescue, and I started reaching out to members, and members started reaching out to me to help me think, talk, walk through these different aspects. So this is back in 2006. It holds true today in 2024, where the accreditation frameworks have been developed, have been evolved, have been adjusted and updated, but still extremely valuable for individuals or groups of people looking to start Recovery High School. As we are about to start examining the four domains of a Recovery High School, let's start this conversation with some initial action steps for Recovery School planners. The first item that is really important to emphasize is to develop a 3 to 5 year strategic plan that includes a budget that is reasonable, attainable, and reflects realistic enrollment projections. The whole foundation of your planning process depends on the legitimacy of this process. If you use inflated enrollment numbers or unrealistic staffing patterns, you're setting up your school for failure. Form a board of directors that reflects the diversity of the community as members with divergent backgrounds and skill sets. One of the biggest lessons for me at Ostagai High, we've been a very successful school, but this is not something we did at the beginning of the school's development. And I think we've been playing catch up for a long time to make sure that we had a board of directors that was vibrant and reflected the diversity of our community. So it's something that you really want to pay attention to at the beginning part of the process. I mentioned that Recovery High Schools are at the intersection of school, community, public health, which means there are many partners that you need to build support for a Recovery High School in your community. And you want to identify and make commitments. Some of them can be formal, like we have a formal MOU with the Substance Abuse Foundation. Some can be more informal programs or organizations that provide services to your students, but you want to be thinking about this at the beginning stages. And very important, one of the most challenging jobs, I believe, out there in education, and maybe I'm a little biased because I'm in that position, is a Recovery High School leader. I think it's very hard, I won't say impossible, difficult to find someone who has experiences in the recovery therapeutic realm, in the education realm, in the community perspective, has that entire skill set to run a Recovery High School. But regardless of who you choose to run your school, they will have expertise in at least one of those areas, and then they must be skilled at bringing the partnerships and collaboration together as they oversee the other aspects. A few more final initial action steps for Recovery School planners. Kind of touched on this a little bit in the last slide, but when you're looking at partnerships, you need partners in all areas. You need treatment partners, you need community resources, you need school partners, and you really need to be intentional about how you're going to create referral mechanisms for your schools. Recovery High Schools, it's not like Field of Dreams where you build it and they will come. You can have a great a well-structured, developed Recovery High School, but if you haven't thought about who your key partners are and how you're going to get students referred to your school, then it's going to be challenging to be successful at the beginning. Once again, all Recovery High Schools, we ask that you pay attention to promoting your schools and programs materials that represent diversity in race, ethnicity, and gender. Especially, they should reflect the demographics of your community, and you should always be assessing if the demographics of your school, your staff, and your students, if they don't match your community, why is that? And to make sure that that's something that you pay attention to and that you address. And this is something you would want to do at the beginning stages. And very importantly, implement regular evaluation of the academic and therapeutic programs for continuous program improvement. We talked about one tool a little bit already, the SEERS, that ARS has been working with other partners to grow and develop, to put in Recovery High School's toolboxes to help them with this evaluation process. Now let's take a moment to take a look at the best practices that you're going to want to be aware of if you're starting the Recovery High School journey. And some of these we've already touched upon, but I think it's important to confirm and reaffirm some of these as extremely important to creating a vibrant Recovery High School. The first is accreditation. Planning team should be guided by the ARS accreditation framework from the outset. Trust me, become familiar with the framework. Learn it, use it with your team, review it, match it up with what you're doing. You'll benefit tremendously from this, especially in the initial planning stages. Restorative practices. When students are struggling with the occurrence of substance use, behavior issues, interpersonal challenges, the appropriate response from school staff should be restorative rather than punitive. There's a whole body of research on restorative practices versus zero tolerance. It came out of the criminal justice system, but it very much applies to students who are in recovery from substance abuse. They have to be given opportunities and spaces to reflect when they make mistakes, whether it's behavioral, recurrence of use, anything that strays away from their goals. Instead of being punished or downgraded or demeaned for these perceived failures, they should be given opportunities to reflect, make amends, and grow as a young person. And restorative practices are the foundation of this process. Peer-to-peer support, a defining characteristic of the Recovery High School environment. A lot of times people will say to me, well, we can hire a substance abuse counselor or a social worker. We can do almost everything that you do at our Recovery High School. And I say, well, maybe not. But what you don't have is you don't have a student when he or she looks to the left or he or she looks to the right, he or she sees another student who's been impacted by substance misuse and is going through not the same, but a similar process with a plan to establish their goals and to move forward. And you can't replicate that in a traditional school environment, in an alternative school environment. And this peer-to-peer support piece is a foundational piece of our schools, and also how we structure the services we provide to our students. Trauma-informed care, unfortunately, but it's kind of makes sense based on what comes along with substance misuse. A significant portion of our students have been impacted by trauma, and it's critical that Recovery High Schools incorporate trauma-informed principles and practices in everything we do. Technical assistance, informal or formal. This can be considered a form of technical assistance. We now get support from SAMHSA, the Peer Center for Recovery and Excellence, to provide formal technical support to individuals and groups. I have found sometimes the best support is the informal support, the support you make through developing networks, individual people, through the conference, through other ARS sponsored events. Like we do cohorts for Recovery High School leaders, for recovery counselors, for teachers. There's all sorts of opportunities to meet individuals or groups of people that you can learn from. And that's how almost everything that I've adopted at Ostagai High was something that I learned from someone else. And hopefully I continue to get opportunities to pay that forward. And once again, end with data collection and evaluation. It's great to have the stories of students when they graduate, to talk about their experiences and other things that can be done to promote the schools, but I don't think anything can replace the effectiveness and the importance of data collection and evaluation. Make sure that's a key part of your ongoing operations. All right, we're about 30 minutes into this presentation. Let's have some fun. I think I want, as we kind of wrap up this first session, I think it's really neat to be able to look at some of the documents and resources that you can connect with that can help you in this process of learning about Recovery High Schools if you're looking to start one. I'm going to take this out of presentation mode because we're going to jump around a little bit. And as you can see, there's some resources that are on that page that I want to familiarize yourself with. There's two websites that are great that I highly recommend you connect with. The ARS website, recoveryschools.org, where if you go to that website, all sorts of cool stuff that you can check out. So we talked about accreditation. It can give you a little overview of accreditation, including an FAQ and how once you're started and you're operating, how you can apply for accreditation. I'm quoted there because I was the first school to be accredited. It was one of the most difficult processes that I've gone through, but also one of the most rewarding and beneficial. I still go back to my accreditation experience and document today for my continuous school improvement process, and we were recently reaccredited. Also, you can, like, talked about the Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Group, JEDI. You can see our statement there, the history of how this work evolved for Recovery High Schools. And I would strongly recommend that you get a chance to open up the North Star Guide for Recovery Leaders, the document that I referenced earlier. And this is something that we have an ongoing committee that does this work, but it's something that it's important that all members of the Association of Recovery Schools are connected with. Finally, I didn't put this in the best practices section, but it's a best practice. If you're not a member, even if you don't have a Recovery High School yet, come to the website, go to the membership page. I've talked a lot about the values of membership. It's been instrumental to me in my journey. This page will guide you to how you can do that. And you can always reach out to anyone in ARS to talk more about ARS and the benefits that come along with membership. The second website that I think is really useful to know is the Peer Recovery Center for Excellence. If you go to that website, I think this is brand new. I looked last week and I didn't see it, but it's up there now. Morgan Thompson, Rebecca Bonner have worked really diligently to come up with a toolkit, we call it Toolkit Lite, for starting a Recovery High School. It's a great resource. A lot of the information that I'm using in this video series is taken or is also in different format in this toolkit. And so I strongly recommend that you check out that website and specifically the toolkit. So there's a few other items that are here that aren't on either one of those websites, but I QR coded them here so that you can access them. The first one being the Recovery High School information sheet. You can see that this information sheet has been updated recently, August of 2024. It was initially started by Dr. Finch, and he keeps it updated, and other members participate in that process. It contains a lot of the information that we've discussed and will discuss in the upcoming sessions. And also including, I didn't do a slide on this, we've talked about kind of best practices and the benefits of Recovery High Schools. One thing we didn't go into in detail are the challenges for Recovery High Schools. And you can see in that section there, a lot of the challenges are related to enrollment variability. Our schools are smaller, which makes it challenging from a budget perspective, but also we're open entry exit, so we have changing enrollments, which makes it hard to maintain school culture. And the newest addition, this wasn't on there last year, is that fewer adolescents are receiving treatment. I can certainly relate to that in Massachusetts, where when we first started, almost all of our students came from some form of publicly funded treatment. Now, the vast majority of our students come to us directly from schools and community, and that poses a whole new set of challenges. Challenges have been pretty awesome, to be honest with you, and exciting, but nonetheless, definitely a challenge that needs to be paid attention to. The last thing that I'll play around with a little with you guys is I love this tool. Andy, Dr. Finch developed it. Um, at the beginning, it's an informal tool. We don't use it to determine if someone can get membership or if they're a recovery high school. It's really a tool that's best served by people who are at the early stages of a recovery high school, or you're changing your model, or you're thinking about developing one. It gives you an overview of all the information, much of which we've already talked about, what recovery high schools are, what they are not. I actually want to run through this together. You can see how it works. Does your school require all students to acknowledge having been negatively impacted by substance misuse? This is kind of one of the baseline foundations of a recovery high school. So if you're answering no to that question, you're definitely going to want to explore that a little bit. Does your school enroll students who have not received treatment? As I just discussed in the Massachusetts experience, 15 years ago, almost all of our students were coming from treatment, and now a majority of our students come to us from school and community. So, do we have students enrolled who have not received treatment? Definitely. Then, once again, see the theories of change, going over the different stages. For students who may be using, what is the earliest change of stage your school will allow to enroll? So we already discussed, and we were very honest that the best stage for a student in recovery high school is maintenance, or at the very least, action. However, with the broader framing that we've adopted in some places, especially where there's not treatment or equitable access to treatment, sometimes you will have students who are earlier in the stages of change. For us, we try to stick to that at least the student being in the action stage, that they've identified that they've been impacted negatively by substance misuse and they're willing to make change. Once again, this kind of reviews this concept of how recovery high schools have traditionally enrolled students in maintenance and termination stage. Does your school share a facility with another program? We haven't touched upon this yet, but one of the core tenets of recovery high schools is that recovery high school should have its own space, whether it's your own building, which is preferred, or now in my case, I used to have my own building. Now I'm co-located with another school, but we have our own designated spaces, and we do not blend students who are enrolled in the recovery high school with those who are not and are not working in a program of recovery. So this is fortunate for me since I've been out of school for 18 years, a recovery high school. The survey indicates that I am indeed a recovery high school, so that's very good news. But once again, this is just an informal tool that helps you. It gives you lots of the information, a lot of stuff we discussed today, and kind of walks you through that process. And especially if you're working with a group of people, it gives you a lot of things to think about and talk about as you're planning a recovery high school. Let's talk about what's next. In today's session, we familiarized ourselves with the history of ARS and the recovery high school model. We reviewed the importance of the why, examined some data on the efficacy of the recovery high school model, examined some best practices and resources, and we started to look at the recommended initial planning steps to start a recovery high school. And that's where our focus will be in the remaining sessions. We will do this work through the lens of the 4 core domains: organization, community, recovery, and education. Our next session will focus on organization and community. We'll combine those, and then there will be individual sessions for recovery and education. Thank you for joining today, and I look forward to continuing this conversation.